Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. Saturday, what a day. It's all a happy day. Hey! Sorry, couldn't resist that one. Anyway, so we are doing with when is it a good idea to concentrate the main armament forward? This is one of those interesting questions because usually when I start talking about this with students, especially ones who've done any kind of initial research, they're going to fit into two camps. They either hate it or they love it. And those camps are further divided by people who think it's purely a response to treaties and purely a response to efficiency. What very rarely comes up is infrastructure as a reasoning for it. And what very rarely comes up is the actual logical military methodologies for it. And the reason for this is because of the way it is sometimes employed. Because honestly, there are better ways to use it than not use it. As you probably guessed from the fact that there is the UAD GUMP, when I say GUMP, I mean the lovely little note they gave me, and they asked me to put in there whenever I use UAD, Admiral Dreadnoughts, in a video, there is going to be some UAD footage in this of me showing you how all forward armament can work and how it can be used. I will be using a highly contrived scenario so that my opponent will actually do what I need him to do for this occasion. Okay? Basically, I will be using, the enemy I will have designed will be a target barge. Life happens. It does. But, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Or alternatively, the enemy will be the Bismarck being used again, but I don't think you'll see in the video where Bismarck was originally recorded yet. That could be coming up. Yes, I built a Bismarck for me to sink. Don't look at me like that. It's perfectly fine. It's a legitimate target. Anyway, leaving that to one side, there is going to be UAD. There is going to be a lot of stuff in here. Also, as of when I've been recording this, I've still got this live, HMCS Hider. And I've had lovely notes from people like Strider and from a few other people who comment below on my videos, basically telling me that I need to up the amount so more can go in there. And I'm basically saying, well, they've got 27 days to go, but we'll see. If people keep being as generous as they are, I will up the amount. And I will make sure it's all spent out there on the trip, because there are lots of things that I could do on the trip that I haven't yet signed up for in terms of the filming, the footage, some of the stuff we're looking at doing, because there are some things which cost money, etc. And when I budgeted everything unnaturally on the bare bones. I'm a early career researcher, been I was a student for that before that many years. I do not, plus Scottish and Cornish blood, I don't spend a lot of money if I can avoid it. And I'm used to working on a very tight budget. So anything more that's in there will just get added on to the things which will get on the trip, and there'll be some things put in there like, well, I've got some ideas of my friend who's got diving gear is near Hyder, and they'll let me, but we'll see that one. I'll have to have a long conversation with the Canadian Parks people about that one. Anyway, so let's start off with the all-forward armament thing. It's an efficiency thing. And this is a lovely drawing and copyrighted by a very nice gentleman whose name I cannot pronounce, but will be in the bottom of the corner. Majek Dunkerques, who has done a lot of work, and I keep finding diagrams, and I presume they come from a book somewhere, but I haven't found the book. And I've done some searching for it and haven't managed to track it down. It looks like a really good book. Perhaps I haven't been able to find an English language version of it. Anyway, this is the G3. And the G3 is a good example to get this from because it shows it's an efficiency thing. And in many ways, the G3 shows that more than anything else, because when you look at the space that's needed between the engine, the boiler rooms, the engines, and the shells to try and keep them separate, that space you have to put both ends if you have guns, main guns, both ends. If you've got secondaries, secondaries can be shoved in anywhere practically on a large enough hull without impacting on the engines or the ammunition or the storage and all these things. But the main armament, that's different. The main armament, the shells can really be impacted about weight. And the shells can be really impacted by the heat. The charges can be impacted by the heat, and the amount of insulation you put on puts weight into the hull, but also takes up space. When we start talking about monitors, if we talk about some of the vessels which were lost during World War I, they were lost because the cork, etc., wasn't properly put in, and the heat got into the magazine. Boom. Things go wrong. Boom. So you need to be very, very careful. This is one of the things about ship design, which is often most interesting to try and get explained to people. Because we know it, we understand it in our head, but for some reason, it's a kind of thing of, for many people, it's a bit of a mental, it's not a mental block, but it's sort of, because navies so rarely do go boom because they mishandle these things, people don't think it will go boom. They think it almost is safe. They think it's a tame tiger rather than a caged tiger. That somehow humans have managed to master the world of high explosives and therefore they have complete control. No. You have blasting charges in the shells. You have all the joys of the shells themselves. You have the actual powder, the charges which are used to fire the shells. All these things are not things you want to cook. Now, the G3s and the N3s were being designed long before there were treaties. So you have to ask yourself, why is the Royal Navy pushing this even before treaties? And surely a foresight bigger. Because the G3 was actually going to be slightly shorter than the hood. The hood was going to be a problem. The Royal Navy knew that. And as I've said in other videos about infrastructure, especially the British infrastructure, the shipyards and infrastructure series, the British and the Royal Navy understood that there wasn't going to be the money to upgrade the infrastructure. Definitely wasn't. It wasn't upgraded in 1916 because they were in the middle of war. It wasn't going to get upgraded in 1922. They were expecting it to be 1928. Next time they got an upgrade of infrastructure, which means they're looking at most of a decade before they start building up the infrastructure again, which would probably take 2 to 3 years. So therefore, they want to get the maximum use of the existing infrastructure they have. G3s are a great example of this. They can go in, they are the infrastructure. They can make use of the existing infrastructure. But they're a lot more powerful and a lot more capable than Hood. Barring, and I will say this with all the love in my heart, that turret! Okay? So I'm not sure which bright spark comes up with this idea. And I have had many people come back to me and go, but these people know far more about battleship design and you overwill Alex, and you know, you're being very egotistical and all this. And I'm sitting there going, yes, but these are people for whom it's very standard to have a center turret on a ship. And I can understand that's where that's come from. That's the center turret. You usually have A, B, a third turret in the middle, and then X and Y. And you can call the middle turret many, many different things, including sometimes Q, just to confuse you. But what I think would have been better is if they had, to me anyway, brought back the forward structure, pushed that center turret in front of, well, brought all the turrets back, and then basically swapped that one round to in front of a turret, so that becomes a turret, and then you've got them all left in a nice F3 formation, like thing, and then probably attached the fore funnel to the forward superstructure, so it's more centralized over the boiler rooms instead of it being over the aft boiler rooms and you having to have trunking to go from the forward boiler room to the forward funnel. Seems to me inefficiency sweeping in there, and it's organized things based around that, but they didn't, and that's fine. But it's an efficiency thing, and I would say that's an inefficiency from an engineering and an operational point of view, because that, let's be honest, that turret, yeah, it's got lovely clearances. It can fire there and there in terms of, it's got, can I get this in? Yeah. All this firing angle both sides. Wonderful, but it's not really covering the stern, and it can't fire forwards, apart from sort of out to that direction. It's not a good idea to me. I can see where it's coming from, but I actually think they get it better when they're looking at the Nelsons. Anyway, I did promise to show you it's not just about efficiency of design, though. There are some operational things, and for that, we are going to go to UAD. So, if you don't mind, 1, 2, 3. Well, let's see. What have we got here for you to fight? Well, as you'll see, it's 2 battle cruisers. And yes, one of them is British. And very, very British. And I have to admit, it's incredibly British. One of them is basically what I imagine an American battle cruiser would have been like if the Americans had gone for an all-forward arrangement somewhere around about the same time as well. As I've said before, the Iowas are to an extent the American equivalent of a battle cruiser. Well, in this case, I have the Audacious, and she looks gorgeous. And let's go follow that gun trail and see where the enemy is and see what she looks like, because I think you're going to like her. I think you are going to like her in a lot. I will first of all show you the opponent, because she's one of my particular designs. My imagined American all-forward gun battlecruiser. Yes, this is what I call the USS Lone Star. Now, I have to admit, she's got 16-inch guns. And she's already been hit by the 18-inch guns from Audacious. But she looks good, doesn't she? Let's be honest. That is one sexy-looking American warship. And as you can see, there is already an interesting scenario, because if you've got 2 ships with an all-forward arrangement of firepower, what are they going to present to each other? They're going to present their guns, but they're also going to present the most narrow profile they can. So the Audacious might be long, but the odds of actually you seeing most of this ship are very, very low. And that's the point. She can afford to, instead of having to go beam onto you, she can keep pointing in a direction, which also gives her a slightly better positioning for being able to avoid your fire. You see, an all-forward arrangement means that you're going to be able to bring the most efficient maximum amount of guns to bear on your opponent as quickly as possible. Now, yes, this is not a Nelson and certainly not a G3 arrangement of guns. And yes, those are 18-inch. But, you know, if I'm demonstrating this and I'm just demonstrating the point, I'm going to use one of the sexiest things I produced. And I have used this ship for a lot of fun. I have caused a lot of trouble for my opponents with this ship before. Because whilst it technically is a battlecruiser, most battlecruisers do not have 14 inches of armor. This one does. This one has 14 inches of armor everywhere. And a top speed of 36 knots. Admittedly, Lone Star is not that different. This is the trouble. I was considering when in the first time I recorded the intro, and I think that's probably the version I'm going to go with. I was considering using the Bismarck, which is one of the other ships I designed, as my thing to sink. That happened a lot quicker than it was supposed to. Let's play it again and see if Lone Star does better this time. I think, yes, we'll play it again. I think the problem is, Audacious is just very, very sexy. Look at this shit. Full weight offset 0.1%. I can do something about that. I probably should do something about that. There you go. But, yeah, you should see, of course, Lone Star. Then this is Lone Star. Fairly decent armor, fairly generically armed, and fairly well protected. Yes, she is a lot lighter, I have to admit, than Audacious is, but she is the modern battlecruiser design, and I think she looks good. I've used her in other videos and other testers, and she does really, really well. So I'm not sure how. It's the first time she's gone up against Audacious. Look, she's got torpedoes at the back, which Audacious doesn't have. Audacious just has all of this. And very well protected. They both have radar gunnery. They both have all those things. And the only difference I can think is these 18-inch guns. And they're just gorgeous, aren't they? They are. But, saying that, I'm not going to knock the 16-inch guns on this beautiful creature. Oh, look at that. I mean, literally, G3, eat your hearts out. And yes, those are 5-inch guns, treble 5 inches on the sides. Yes, she's got 8 treble 5-inch guns, so she's carrying 24 5-inch guns, because, well, who wouldn't want that many 5-inch 38s in their lives? I could festoon her with 40mm as well, but for this occasion, I'm not really worrying. And she is slightly on the light side, but she is pretty heavily armored. I might actually up her armor a bit, see if that can help her versus the 18-inch. I see she's got a 12-inch main deck. Her main deck is 12 inches thick, and yet still that happened. I'm not sure how. Foredeck is 12 inches thick. Aft deck is 4 inches thick, but that's because of the way the weighting seemed to just work. I'll be good to the conning tower. That is what I will pump up. I will pump up the conning tower, give him more survivability that way. See if that doesn't work and help things out. Expensive ship, but worth it. Worth it so much. Even though her superstructure is fairly heavily armored, this is going to be an interesting battle. This is going to be an interesting battle. So let's launch it again. Okay. Sorry to my... as I said, she's a very, very good-looking battlecruiser in my mind. I like Lone Star. Yes, she is called Lone Star because I didn't want to... when originally I started building her, the game said me USS Texas, and I thought, no, there can be only one Texas. But I will not get rid of the name completely, and it will be Lone Star. So, is it just these 18-inch guns are just that fantastic? I do love a nice 18-inch gun. And this thing is a beast. I have to admit, Audacious is an absolute animal. I have used her in a couple of times to see battlecruiser versus battleship combat, and she can make most battleships, which are, let's put it this way, World War I era in their design, cry quite heavily. Let's go and watch Lone Star and see what exactly happens to her. Because this is interesting me now. What exactly happens to you, Lone Star? Again, the forward guns allow you to present a far more narrow profile, and they allow you to focus your fire that much more quickly. They also mean that you've not got, in terms of your command and control positions, they aren't going to be behind the smokestack. So not going to smoke them. Oh, it is the 18-inch guns, isn't it? It is. It's absolutely the 18-inch guns. I am sorry, Lone Star. You are a beautiful ship, but honestly, Audacious is just that much of a beast. I'm not sure what can I do. Maybe in future I'll try and get you out with 18-inch guns, but then I'll have to reduce your armor, and I like your armor and your speed. I can see why you think she's a battleship. She is certainly act like it, but she is a battlecruiser. A very cute one, even if she's been bashed up. And she's got 4 inches of armor on her superstructure, and that's just been taken to pieces. 18-inch guns are an absolute animal. And, yeah. Admittedly, Audacious is 82,000 tons of pure, I'm coming for you. And it never hurts if you turn up 82,000 tons of I'm coming for you. So there is kind of a weight disparity. This also might serve to answer the point of some people who think that how? Now, it might serve to answer the point of the people who sometimes seem to suggest that HMS Hood might have successfully fought off Yamato. There is a difference there. Good lord, the Lone Star got bashed. I'm still not sure how. Yeah, I know. I'm presuming it's the 18-inch guns, but that's about it. That's all I can think of. All I can think of is that it was the 18-inch, as you saw. It's just, it seems rather cruel to me, but anyway. The point the battle was supposed to show, and I was planning on it showing, and I should add in another one at some point later in this video to try and do it properly. I'll make it a German opponent next time, very heavily armored and very slow, so I can just wander around her. Anyway, leaving that to one side. The advantages of an all-forward armament and aft engines come down to fighting efficiency. Come down to three forms of efficiency, actually. Efficiency of design in terms of space. You don't have to have so much dead space. In fact, as was shown when you used when we sort of considered Nelrod design, using the superstructure and the spaces that go below that as the divider between the magazines and the guns and the engine rooms works really well. Efficiency of fire, because all your guns are in front of your smokestacks, and you can have all the directors in front of them, and you can, with proper aerodynamics, you can ensure that they always have a clean view. And efficiency of orientation, because you can orientate all your main guns onto your opponent without showing the fullness of your hull. So you can, to an extent, shield your engine spaces. Because if you think about it, if you're like this, and your engine spaces are in the middle of your hull, that's where I'm going to be aiming for. I'm going to be slamming that part if I hit anything. Because that's what my guns are going to be aiming for. They're going to be aiming to try and hit in the center of your mass. Because that's the most densest part of you, and the area I'm most likely to actually achieve a hit, especially the ranges we're talking about. Whereas, if your guns are here at the front, and your engines are here at the back, and even if you're doing at a slight angle, that's suddenly a far harder thing for me to hit. It's a far narrower. But if you're doing that full on, now I have to punch somehow through you to get to your engine. For battle cruisers, it almost makes more sense than for any other ship. Battleships, there is a reason why you need to have the rear covered, especially if you think you could end up in a scenario a la Jutland, or in a melee a la Sirte, or some of the other battles in the Mediterranean, where you might need to fire in multiple directions at the same time and cover your full 360 with heavy gunfire. But battlecruisers aren't supposed to be bogged down in those sorts of fights. Those are the sort of fights battlecruisers are supposed to go, more speed, please, and be out of. So for a battlecruiser, this sort of thing makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of capability. Now, I can't, of course, go through this all without discussing the treaty stuff, because the treaty stuff is important. For France, they are limited to 175,000 tons. That's a big issue. Once you start thinking you're going to have to do more than deal with Italy, which is also limited to 175,000 tons. Japan has 315,000 tons. If I'd been Japan, I'd have asked for more. Honestly, I'd have gone, no, I have to have the equivalent of Italy and France combined. I will not settle for being less than them combined. Which would have given them another 35,000 tons. Another battleship. They'd have had 10 35,000-ton ships they'd have been allowed. Interestingly enough, though, that would probably scale up again with the USA and the UK and the British Empire. Because if they're allowed 315,000 to the, i.e. 60% roughly, of the 525,000, well, if they get an extra 35,000 tons, the British and Americans probably get an extra 50,000 tons? Whatever it is, it'll be something. And something will certainly be better than nothing. No counter ship of any contracting power shall carry a gun with a caliber in excess of 16 inches, and no capital ship exceeding 35,000 tons stand displacement shall be acquired by or constructed for or within the jurisdictions of any of the contracting powers. These are the agreements. And this comes up to the arrangement of France, because France, theoretically, with 175,000 tons, are able to maintain 5 35,000-ton battleships. Five 35,000-ton battleships. Well, there's a small problem with that. just a small one. At this point, France had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 battleships, a total of 221,000 tons. And France was allowed to lay down new tonnage in 1927, 1929, and 1931 as provided in Part 3, Section 2 to replace their older ships. In fact, some of their older ships were so old that, frankly, no one really. There was actually at one point during the meetings and discussion actually a view put forward that some of the French ships should not be included in the treaty due to their age and the fact that everyone else was laughing at them. I think they ended up including them in the treaty because the French felt it would be more insulting if they weren't. First London Treaty, well, Washington, as you see, had the factor in it. It set the limit, 35,000 tons. London's issues are, well, for a surface vessel not exceeding 3,000, for a surface vessel exceeding 3,000 tons, but not exceeding 10,000 tons, they have this requirement of replacements. There are all sorts of replacements and details put in about when ships are going to be considered over age, how old they have to be before they can be repaired and replaced. And it becomes a factor. But honestly, I have to admit, the London Treaty, the first London, is more obsessed with the coming of the aircraft carrier and closing off the very interesting holes that have been left in the Washington Treaty because of what certain other powers were doing about them towards the aircraft carrier. So let's look at the Nelson class. So, I'm starting off with the Nelson class, but this is not Nelson. This is an N3. Why have I gone straight for the N3? Well, honestly, as options for ships go, this is quite important as a starting point to getting to the Nelson class. You see, we can start off with the G3s, and they're often the more commonly known because they're ones which are actually starting construction, but the N3s are important. The Royal Navy was planning 2 classes of ships, both based around the same format. Maximum firepower, maximum infrastructure, use of existing infrastructure, because they weren't going to be able to upgrade the infrastructure, they reckon, until about 1928. Remember, they're on 6-year cycles. They hadn't got 1916's upgrades because of World War I. They didn't think they were going to get 1922's upgrades because, well, not even before the treaties, they just didn't think that the government was going to give them the budget for it. They might get some minor upgrades in 1922, but those would be more ongoing facilities rather than actually something useful. So, till 1928, they were going to be stuck with the infrastructure they had. Hood was lovely, but couldn't make use of much of it. So they needed the most efficient possible design that would provide the most power from the existing infrastructure. This is where you start to get into issues. Because for battleships, you want the most survivable, hardest hitting, powerful ship you can build. Which means you're probably going to sacrifice speed. That's the concept they're going with. And they're planning on building 4 of these vessels. 4. And I know originally they planned to be called Saints and all sorts of things, but the reality is they are probably going to be a battle class, if anything. They're also planning 4 G3s, which, of course, I had a lovely design of earlier to show you the layout of them internally. So they had 4 fast ships, which were very well armoured by the standards of the time, but were being armoured as battle cruisers of this level. Remember, they are going to be the first post-World War I battle cruisers. So those people who start to say, oh, they are the proto-fast battleship, they're this, that, they are not. They are post-First World War experience battle cruiser designs. That's why they have the armour they have. That's why they have everything else they have. These are the post-World War I battleship designs. These things are survivable. They are mahusive on the survivability level. They are, oh my lord, you really need any more armor? Basically, I think one of the people I've discussed this with has put it as they are a lump of armor. That is what they are. They are something which you are going to hit and hit and hit again and keep hitting, but you're not going to break them. Not that quickly. And they've got 18-inch guns, and those are going to do a lot of damage to you. Now, I have to admit, I don't like their design of the internals. I don't like it. I think actually the British get it far better with the Nelsons in terms of the internals because of this particular gun. But I understand it. But this is where the RN's coming from in terms of battleship doctrine. And think about the figures. They're planning on building 4 of these and 4 G3s. So they're planning on building 8 ships. 4 fast ones, which had 16-inch guns, and 4 slower ones, which had 18-inch guns. So basically, if you could outfight these, you probably can't outpace them. If you can outpace these, if you can outfight these, though, you're not going to be able to outfight these. At no point. There would be nothing built. The moment, in the nicest way, if the British had got the G3s and the N3s into service, if the treaties had been held off till 1926, and the British had built the 8 ships, there would have been panic. And that is not something which is out of the probability. I think there would have been naval treaties. I do honestly believe that whatever happens, the interwar period probably produces a naval treaty system. But it happens in 1920, and there is no reason why it might not have gone beyond the next election cycle, which could well have taken it to 1926, which could have well meant an N3 and G3s were in service. Because again, the British were quite happy to build them. They were building them away quite happily. And people, and before anyone starts going here, well, the budget, etc., the British were quite happy to spend money on upgrading their navy. Remember, whilst yes, the First World War is witness of the largest mass conscription army and all these things that Britain builds, and that to this day is the lasting image for us. For Britain as a whole, and especially in the political classes at the time, World War I had been a global war. Britain had been and to a large extent, a maritime war, where they had been moving goods and trade around the world, where they had been able to survive because of the empire, because of their ability to maneuver resources, which was all dependent upon naval strength. And that had been focused on dealing with Germany. Now they were dealing with a far more diffused threat system scenario. And I honestly believe you'd have had, if they continued on like they probably would have done, you would have probably found the N3s were being based in the home fleet, or the Mediterranean fleet, possibly the Mediterranean, and to watch the Italians and the French, and basically go, you got anything that can fight us? No? Be quiet, then. And the G3s could well have found themselves the cornerstone of the Indian Ocean fleet, of the Far East fleet. Because that would have been, they'd been perfect for that. That was their job profile. That makes sense. The Royal Navy is building a fleet. That is what he's thinking about. It's building a fleet structure. So these ships, of course, are cancelled by Washington. They're Washington cherry trees. And the Nelson class is what comes about. And I both love and loathe this class sometimes, because I love them because they are the most efficient use of the tonnage available possible from the perspective of you're only building 2 units. If you're building more than 2 units, and I discussed this in many other videos, so please go look them up, then making them like they do makes no sense. If you're building 6 or anything else, you build them probably more towards the fast, but you would probably build a fast battleship. And remember, a fast battleship really at its core is the hybrid of the battle cruiser and the battleship. It's, to an extent, okay, we want battleship level armor, and we can't, as a battleship level armor as we can get, but we want the speed to be as close to a
battlecruiser as possible. The battlecruiser, we're talking about 36 something knots. The battleship in the G3 in the G3N3 era, we're talking 21, 24 knots. If it's 21 knots and we've got that's 30, let's say the battlecruiser is 35 knots. Well, 14 knots, halfway in the middle is 28. That's where I tend to begin. Say a battleship which can do 28 plus knots is a fast battleship. That's that sort of happy medium. Because one vessel is all about armor, one vessel is about speed, and one type is a combination of the two to get the most versatile platform you can. Because in World War I, it makes sense to have the different types. Once you start a treaty system which combines them into a capital ship, and you can't build as many as you like, well, then you start to think about one type. And your first reaction, and the British first reaction, especially when they can only get 2 Nelsons, is to build the largest armoured canoe they can possibly conceive. And for those who are wondering where this design comes from, look at that design and look at that structure, and then think, what happens if I move Q turret to the C turret position, up there, spin it around a bit, and then I swap it around the structure and combine the superstructures. Yeah, that's it, isn't it? That is literally what they have done. And that has made it a more efficient design. And this will enable it, because of its forward firing, and that's Nelson, not Rodney. When Rodney's engaging Bismarck, she'll be able to pretty much dance around from shell fall to shell fall while focusing herself at her opponent. I think I've already said, it's when you're broadside on, the more of your full side of your ship you have to present to your opponent to fire all your guns, the bigger target you give and the more easier it is to hit your engines. Narrower profile you can give, the better. Nelson class Bismarck versus Bismarck probably can present 15 or so degrees at an angle. So it's a very narrow profile while dancing from shellfall to shellfall. So you make it far more difficult for you to hit because you're presenting a far more difficult aspect. It's far more difficult to judge how far away this hand is from the camera than this hand. This hand? This is this hand. And the trouble is, again, if we go consider the King George V class, again, they don't have to turn fully broadside on, but they have to turn a lot more of their broadside. They don't have to be quite this to your target to actually fire a broadside, but where they have to be sort of more like this, or this, whereas the Nelson can be like this, or even to an extent like this, and just have 6 guns blasting at you. That is the advantage of the forward firing. And that is the advantage of the design. It allows you to be far more efficient in terms of your protection. And that's one of the key forms of efficiency. And as I said before, the 3 forms of efficiency you're looking for are the efficiency of design in terms of its hull shape and the amount of power it needs to achieve the speed it gets. The efficiency of design in terms of the use of the hull and the use of space within the hull, and efficiency of design in terms of how much the arcs of fire and the coverage of your guns. All these 3 things factor into judging the overall efficiency of a ship design. Now, the Nelson class, in profile, this is a great design. And as you can, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something slightly weird. I'm not going to take this over to full screen so you can still see my hands underneath, but I am a disembodied head now. So, as you can see, here we have the magazines. This is the shell. Then we have insulation. And then we have the engine rooms, because the engine rooms, believe it or not, don't get as hot as the boiler rooms. So the engine rooms are here. The boiler rooms, which generate the steam and all the heat, are here underneath the funnel. So they have a very efficient connection up to their funnel, which makes them far more efficient when it comes to drawing air and getting the circulation and getting the throughput on the engines. So these are the engines of steam, and this is the shafts. Two-shaft design. Now, again, you will hear me often talk about the fact that this should have been a three-shaft design. And there is also the point I would make that if the Royal Navy had been getting more than two, and so had been thinking about, well, maybe slightly less armour or spreading that armour over a slightly larger space, these ships would have still been useful if they had been slightly longer. They would still been just as practical infrastructure-wise if they had been slightly longer. And by slightly longer, what do I mean? Well, famously, these are 216 metres long, compared to Hood's 262 metres. So that's a big difference, okay? 44 metres difference, 46 metres difference. I think myself, judging by this length and the index given on this vessel in terms of feet, etc., and how big the boiler rooms were, I don't think you need to add more than 14 meters to this ship to be able to both bring flip B and C turret round in terms of having C turret super firing over B turret and B turret same level as A turret and able to fire over A, and have the space to accommodate the extra boilers and engines needed for a third shaft. And before you start going, well, 3 shafts, that's not very Royal Navy, the Royal Navy actually does often do 3 shafts. They're usually for things like aircraft carriers, but they have been done before. A third shaft is not an unusual format for the Royal Navy in some regards. Now, I'd also add, quite a few people are going to look at it and go, but Alex, you've been talking about how it's dead space when you have to have insulation between the magazines and the boilers, and that's one of the reasons why they have the engines rooms, because they're cooler anyway than the boiler rooms, and then you have the insulation, and then you have the magazines on this design. But the 6-inch magazine is right next to the boiler rooms. Again, you put in insulation, but also, this is going to sound terrible, but the 6 inches are the secondaries. They're not for AA work, not like on the Riculus and other vessels. They are your anti-surface vessels. In many respects, there, as I've written over before when discussing secondaries, when you start to see a 6-inch secondary, you're looking at something, engaging something bigger than a destroyer. You're talking about a capability which can engage cruisers. And to an extent, again, this is about the efficiency of design. Because, yes, you should probably be talking about using your primary weapons to engage larger ships. But that's also, to an extent, a waste of shells sometimes. And having 6-inch secondaries gives you a lot of capability for engaging other ships which really don't justify using too much effort from your primaries on them. So your primaries can save the shells and focus on something else. It's about efficiency of design. My main problems with the Rodney and Nelson are pretty much the efficiency is so focused on providing armor because the Royal Navy is only getting 2, so they want to make them as survivable as possible, that I think they let them drop down as efficiency of what they could have been. And very easily they could have been 28, 29 knot ships. Very easily. Without much effort at all. And very simply you could have had it so that all 9 guns could have been used to fire forward. Yes, it's not 100%. And yes, the angle at which the B turret would be firing over A turret would be very, very, would have to go up to pretty much almost as maximum elevation. But it could be done. With a little bit of work. As I said, my calculation is roughly 14 meters. Now, for people who are sort of going, but 14 meters, that doesn't sound like a lot. It is a lot. It's 46 feet. And if we again go to the design, on this one up here,
you will notice that the boiler rooms are actually less than 50 feet in their spacing, and so are the engine rooms. In fact, the engine rooms are, well, one's roughly 20 and one's roughly 30 feet. So an extra 46 foot would be a lot of space. It'd also be more weight, but again, these are 33,800 tons versus the 35,000 ton limit. And again, I can understand why the Royal Navy doesn't make the decision. They are going with forward-firing guns, which is going to make these ships as survivable as possible because they present the most narrow profile of themselves to their opponent as possible, making them the hardest to attack and far harder to fire back at, whilst they can maximize their firepower. And if you try and cross their T, well, in the nicest way, you crossing their T presents your broadside to them. And traditionally, the advantage of crossing a T is you can fire all your guns at the opponent, while they can only fire less than half of their guns at you. Why 6 guns on the front of HMS Dreadnought to fire forward on HMS Dreadnought are so important to Jackie Fisher. So that crossing the T is a freaking dangerous proposition. Well, in this case, you're crossing the T, they're just at a slight angle, and yes, you're presenting all your guns, but you're a nice big fat target, and they're still a smaller target, and in fact, they're getting smaller rapidly as you cross their T, and they can fire all their guns, or nearly all their guns, at you while you're doing it. That's not a good position to be in. You're presenting your most vulnerable spaces, i.e. your engine rooms, to them, and what are you doing? You're firing into their thickest lumps of armour, while all their guns can fire you. Ouch. That's not good. So, this is not a good scenario to try and take on. But again, if you're building more than 2, then I think within the extra 1,200 tons and within the other things they could do, they could well have built a slightly faster ship. Might be slightly less armor. Might be. I'm thinking that the waterline belt might have gone from between 13 and 14 inches to a consistent 13 inches along it. But I think they could have been done without too much effort. And it would have given the Royal Navy a good class of ships. But overall, they are a very successful design, and they do show the compartmentalization of these designs. It's one of the things that actually this class is actually quite easy to work out how to lengthen them and how you do it, because you have, because of the way it's designed and the efficiency of the design, you're able to easily compartmentalize it instead of section off. So I know how much extra distance I need to give to the forward point here, roughly 2 meters more. I know that most of the remaining 12 meters would go for the stern chunk, and I'd probably put them on most of them added on to this sort of middle area. I also might, in the nicest way, go for a G3 style transom stern, in which case I might not actually be adding on the full 14 meters in overall length, actually, because I'd cut the stern down a bit instead of having the rounded stern, which again might help me with speed, etc. These are things which the Royal Navy's already considered. This is stuff which the Royal Navy's already looked at with the G3s and the M3s. But still, this is a very efficient design for the treaty system. The Royal Navy is only able to build 2, and therefore they are the precious Fabergé eggs. They must be protected. Yes, they are also the mighty Four's hammer of 9 16-inch guns, but they are at the same point not ships which the Royal Navy wants to risk. So they have to make a choice, and the choice they go for is armor over speed, is condensing the main battery over firing arcs of that battery. You have to make a decision of, do you want to go survivability of your ship, or do you want to give your gun slightly better firing arcs? Because that's what you're doing when you start spreading them. The arrangement I go on, which is called the F3 arrangement, or potentially doing maths, you could go a different way if you're going battleship design.
gives you a slightly better firing arc. And, the raised C turret versus the B turret, the flipping around, you can, as said, you can theoretically at certain ranges have all 9 guns firing forward at your opponent. And so you have a full arc around the ship, which is more powerful, of firepower. Also, the advantages for that, this is going to sound terrible, the advantages for that are you bring the raised center, the raised height, the metacentric height of the ship back. The metacentric center of the ship, you bring it back towards the center of the hull. Which is quite useful, because currently where it is raised up, that's fine, it's not going to cause too many troubles, and this is actually quite stable sea boats. But pulling it back is probably just going to add to the stability, because they needed more of that. They are firepower and protection over speed. Sometimes, traditionally, people talk about the Battle of Jutland having shown this, but honestly, if the Battle of Jutland had been so much a proof of firepower and protection over speed, then you wouldn't have been started off with building the G3s or the Admiral class. You'd have been building prototype N3s. You'd have been building them from the beginning. But no, the reason the Royal Navy is building the battle cruisers is because, yeah, you need the battleships for fighting the battles, but the war has been a war of naval maneuver. If we consider that Dogger Bank, all the other battles, and all the other operations in World War One are battles of naval maneuver. Jutland is the only set-piece battle of World War One. Jutland is it. It's a massive battle. It's a big thing. But the lessons from the Royal Navy are not necessarily the firepower and protection over speed and maneuverability, which is often stressed by so many historians and so many authors who look at it and almost consider it like the Royal Navy has a knee-jerk reaction. And they often use the Nelson class in illustration of this, but there is another, as I often try and point out, the reason the Nelson and Rodney are built like they are is because they're only 2 ships. As my mantra, which I'm probably going to have repeated in this video many, many times, 1 is none, because it's capability when it's availability. 2 is usually a capability available. But as the stories of Nelson and Rodney go, whenever one of them's in service, or one of them's in refit, there's only one left in service. They switch out. This is the reason they're in the home fleet. They switch out being the ship in the home fleet and the flagship, because they are the most powerful battleships in the Royal Navy. They only have 2 of them. I know people talk about Hood being the most powerful ship in the Royal Navy. It's not. It's not. It's got 8 15-inch guns, which are lovely, but it's not got the armor or the firepower of these. All it's got is speed and size, which is glorious. It's big, impressive for the battlecruiser role, but no. And if these had been 28-knot ships, the first thing that would have happened would have, of course, been the Queen Elizabeth class. When they've been upgraded, would have been upgraded to 28-knot ships because they could be, and that would have affected our class and all sorts of things. But if they'd been 28-knot ships, the odds are Hood would have been would have actually slipped down the importance scale. Her advantage is the speed and the presence, because it's such an overwhelming speed advantage over these. But that's the sole thing going from the versus these ships. She can get away from them, not she can fight them. They could do 23 knots with 2 shafts, and with 45,000 shaft horsepower. That's how efficient that hull design is. You up that horsepower, that shaft horsepower to, well, I don't know, 8. She's got 8 multi-drum boilers, 45,000 shaft horsepower coming from the 8 of them. Up it to 10 or 12, probably 10 boilers, and 3 shafts. 60,000 shaft horsepower is quite probably attainable. You are probably looking at a 28, 29 knot ship without too much more effort. That's an efficient hull design. And it comes from this. And this is also not a reaction to Jutland. Well, it is, but it isn't. It is, in many ways, the N3 can be more considered a reaction to the Jutland, but the fact that they're building the G3 shows what it is for purposes. The N3s are being built as statements because it's part of a fleet doctrine. It's a case of, okay, you have to build ships which are either going to be fast enough to run away from this or strong enough that they can outfight the G3s. But the trouble is, if you build them strong enough to outfight the G3s, the odds are they aren't going to be fast enough to run. They aren't going to be able to fast enough to run away from this, and they're not going to be strong enough to fight this. Or if they are, it'll be a meeting of equals. And if they are fast enough to outrun this, then the odds are they aren't going to be strong enough to fight. The odds are they aren't going to be strong enough to fight the G3s. Or it's going to be a meeting of equals. It's the Royal Navy laying down standards for the future and basically going, you all think you've learnt lessons of World War I. We actually have. And this, the Nelson class, well, they are the lessons from World War I, from all those battles, fitted into a class which is only going to be 2 ships, and they're all the 16-inch gun ships the Royal Navy is going to have for the next few years. They cannot afford. They don't know what the world's going to happen. They don't know whether they might be fighting another war in 3 years or 5 years against whoever. So they have to build these ships knowing, right then, if we lose one, we then go down to having none of this capability. These are our most powerful hammers. We have to make them as survivable as possible. Therefore, they will rely on cruisers. And our battle cruiser force, HMS Tiger, HMS Renown, HMS Repulse, and Hood, for the speed. These will be the hammers. Here's the French. Well, here's what they start off with. Dunkirk is really the first fast battleship. And it's a really cool design. But you're probably looking at me going, Alex, that's not Dunkirk. No, this is one of the original designs for the Dunkirk. And yes, I have done some colouring in and working on it myself to try and refine it a little bit. Anyway, the whole point was this was going to be 36,000 tons, fully loaded, not in standard, in fully loaded. But still, that's a big, impressive ship. However, again, we go back to the earlier scenario for the French. They have 175,000 tons as their limit. Big, impressive ship is sexy and lovely. But the odds are they'll be able to get 5, maybe 6 ships out of it. That's not enough. Not when you've got the Italians and potentially the Germans to deal with. And this is what the French are really worrying about. They're worrying about their world. They're looking at the British Nelson class, they're looking at the Italian cruisers coming in, and they're looking at the Deutschland class. And so they go, you know what, we're going to try and get this for a lot less. We're going to build something which is 26,500 tons. So in simple terms, and I want you to think about this, that aft gun and that arrangement, that costs 9,500 tons in ship design. This is what comes in at 26,500 tons standard. 35,000 tons, 35,500 tons in deep load. So yeah, she puts on 9,000 tons in deep load. But in standard, she's a lot less. And this is another good illustration of the spacing.
Again, you can see they've used the oil fuel, they've used other sources of fuel as methods of insulating between the boiler room and the magazines. They can do that. Yes, she's got fresh water pushed around, she's got ballast, she's got feed water, she's got oil water fuel storage. All the things she can possibly need. And she's carrying 8 13-inch guns. Okay. They're 330mm guns. They're not massively powerful in the way we think of them, but they are more than capable of doing the job they need to do. And that's what they're there for. They are there to be a forward engagement tool. They're there to deal with Italian 12-inch battleships and Deutschen class, and probably Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, although the French probably only had rough ideas about what the Germans might be considering in the future. Because yes, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau are fast battleships. Dunkerque class are fast battleships. They're not battle cruisers, they're fast battleships. And when I say a fast battleship, they're capable of a speed of 29.5 knots. That makes them definitely a fast battleship, and that's why I call them the first fast battleships. Their orientation of firepower allows efficiency of hull. It allows them to use the French infrastructure to the maximum. It allows them to be built relatively quickly and relatively easily. And I would consider this actually a very modern layout if we consider the fact that you have your weaponry up front and you have your aircraft off the back. That does sound like quite a lot of modern ship designs. Then we have the Touron class. Now, the trouble is, whilst for battleships, and there is a problem, as I've been over, in the fact that you can be attacked from all angles, so having the rear covered is probably sensible. But in terms of battle cruisers, and if your battleship is orientated like a fast battleship often is about engaging in one-on-one engagements, when you can reorientate yourself to the threat, a forward arrangement has advantages. Touron class. All forward firepower, and rear it's the aircraft. Well, there's efficiency in that, and there's efficiency in terms of their systems. But the trouble is, for a cruiser, they tend to fight in this period in a slightly more pell-mell battle than perhaps their battleship colleagues will do so. They don't have the relative firepower necessary to go and to take their opponent out at long range. 8-inch and 6-inch guns have a similar effective range in terms of where they can effectively engage and kill their opponents. It's one of the things about the Royal Navy works out quite quickly when you're looking at the 8-inch versus the 6-inch design. They're looking at going, okay, here's the theoretical maximum range of the 8-inch, and this is, but pre-radar, the practical maximum range of the 8-inch and the practical maximum range of the 6-inch are not as dissimilar as you might like to assume. And you're going to get a lot more shells on target with the 6-inch than you are with the 8-inch, and if people are going following the treaties, they're not going to have enough armor that's going to make any difference. So might as well splatter them with 6-inch shells. I think myself with the Touron class, it's a system which I can understand why they've done what they've done, but it's not really sensible. When you're a cruiser, you need that all-around fire even more. If you aren't going to have the all-around fire, then it's probably better to lose one of the turrets, especially one of the ones which can't fire forward because you've raised B turret up,
and pump in the armor, give them the extra protection to try and resist some of the hits. Because they are going to have a more dynamically maneuvering contest, they are going to have a harder fight, and they're going to be called upon to be an escort quite often. And speaking of escorts, that brings us, of course, to the battle class. Now, the battle class are rather like Nelrods, Dunkerques, and the theoretical F3s, to an extent the G3s. And my lovely Lone Star. I know she got sunk both times, but I feel bad for her. I should have commanded her. She might have had a chance with me in charge of her. Admittedly, I'd have possibly got sunk still, but I'd have given it a go. The battle class are an efficient design, again, but it's not about engines. Although it does help when you have between deck turrets rather than upper deck turrets, i.e. capital ship style turrets rather than the ship style turrets which are supposed to be fitted to destroyers, fitted to have them all located in one space, because you need to support them with a multi-deck arrangement, as HMS Savage found, which was the testbed for this system. But you also notice the rear isn't exactly empty. People go, oh, they're an all-forward gun arrangement. Well, that's a hell of a... That's a... a lot of... a great amount, in fact, of 40mm sitting aft. In fact, that's a bit of a 40mm farm. And that's the point. These destroyers are more orientated around general purpose roles than pretty much any other destroyer being built at this period. But as part of that, they are shoving them full of 40mm for the air defense. They've got the 4.5 for slightly longer range air defense, but also anti-surface and anti-land targets and all the general purpose duties to give them that firepower. They've got the torpedoes that allow them to take out surface ships. They've got the depth charges and other systems which allow them to attack submarines, and they've got a shed load of 40mm in order to allow them to protect capital ships and themselves from enemy air attacks. And simply put, fitting a third BD turret, whilst lovely to the rear, due to the limitations of a BD turret mounted on a destroyer hull, would A have been very expensive, and B would have meant a lot less 40mm. And the thing is, the 40mm is a good thing to have for a battle class. It is. So, I've done the historical ships, and I've gone through them, and we've had a lovely... By the time this comes up, we'll have a live discussion on it and gone through them in that way in slightly longer detail. But I wanted to talk to you about modern ships as well, and this is going to be only on the long patrol. The live isn't going to have had this bit. Type 42 Sheffield class. Again, all forward armament. And again, there is a sensible reason going on here. Yes, modern ships are new and sexy and lovely. And the Type 42s, of course, have been and gone by now. But they had an all-forward arrangement because, again, missiles, shells do not like being cooked by engines. So you want space between them. In this case, if you look at the ship, you can go, I wonder what thing would be not far below the bridge. It might be put sort of in the area in the hull below the bridge level, which, you put in there to provide distance between the engines and the magazines. And the British have kept doing it. There's the Type 23 Duke class. The Type 22s, or more interesting enough, were orientated around and did have more distributed firepower. But the moment the British got the VLS working for the Seawolf, back again to an all-forward arrangement. Now, there is something interesting going on, because, again, when we get to the Type 45s, it's an all-forward arrangement. But if we consider the Type 26s and the Type 31s, and potentially the future Type 83s, These are not all forward arrangements. They are going to be distributed lethality in terms of their firepower spread around their ship. This reflects the growing size of ships and the technologies we have in terms of cooling and temperature stabilization, but also where we are putting the things in the ships and the spaces we are able to free up in the ships with slightly reduced crews and more reliance on technology. But B, this is the more important thing, go back to the daring class. Battle class. Go back to the battle class. They had an all-forward arrangement because they were festooned with other weapons. Yes, they had their big guns forward, and those were powerful, menacing, and threatening designs. But they were crammed full of weaponry. Turning class. It's aircraft at the rear and crammed full of weaponry. And I would argue possibly the least successful of the forward-oriented ships. Dunkerque class. Oh, well, yes, you've got aircraft here, but where are your secondaries? Nelson class. Yes, it's got its main guns forward. But where are its secondaries? We expand this up. You will see a whole host of 4.7-inch guns and 6-inch guns sitting towards the stern. Plus other machine gun mounts and positions as well, all over studding the superstructure. There to provide it with protection against enemy air attack. So here is the other thing it allows you to do. It allows you to specialize your areas of the ship. You have your forward firepower orientated. That's your offensive firepower. All the rest for a battleship, 6-inch guns, 4.7-inch guns, they're all defensive in a battleship's world. Its offensive tool is those 9 16-inch guns. Those are what it's going to use offensively. Those are what it's going to use to take out its primary targets. Anything that's being engaged with other things is its secondary targets or something that's coming to attack it that it can't swat out of the sky with a 16-inch gel. And that is the point. When we start talking about modern ships, and we start talking about their weapons being distributed about and stuff, usually when you start talking about weapons being distributed about, you're talking about defensive weapons. Again, when we talk about the Type 26s and the Type 31s, it's the sea scepters which are being moved about, packed in. The defensive weaponry. The offensive weaponry is still being grouped together. Why? Well, honestly, it comes down to, again, it's an efficient use of hull space. Whatever system you're talking about is going to require something to support it. In the case of magazines with shells and charges in, and it's going to require temperature maintenance, and it's going to require things being looked after. If it's the case of missiles, it's the same. You have to look after your missiles. You have to provide a space where they're not going to get salt water in on them. The British, as always, are rather obsessed with the concept of salt water, and I swear this is one of the reasons why our ships tend to go, yes, we could make them flush with the hull, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to build a solid, great big structure around them. It might. This is a ship which is entirely designed around being as radar absorbent and as small a profile on radar as possible. And yeah, and look at it. You've got the gun forward. Okay. Then you got the VLS module. And yes, we can go, oh, well, they needed the extra space, or well, there's all sorts of good arguments which can be made for it. But it is also there because, in the nicest way, it's going to protect it from the high seas to an extent. And that's what the British are factoring in again, because they have less of them, so they need to build it in. And it's being put all forward. And if we consider the back, there's a little 30mm. There is the 30mm, and there is the phalanx. That's where they're orientated to be. Aft, hangar, flight deck, aviation fuel storage. There is a logic when you're dealing with ship design about where you place things. It is like arranging a dinner party table. Think about it. When you're having friends over, or you're putting any group together, there are people you know will get along well, and there are people who won't. Okay? I have one friend who loves to organize D&D or tournaments. And Dungeons and Dragons, I have to admit myself, I enjoy to an extent, but I do not enjoy to the extent that some of my friends do. It's fun, but it's never become part of my every week. They, when they're setting up their tables, have to bear in mind not just whether the individuals involved get on, but they actually make care to worry about the characters of those individuals and whether they get on. Because both sets can lead to an argument and trouble if they're sitting next to each other. And that makes it very complicated. But it's like that with ship design. When we are designing a ship, when we say a design is efficient or is inefficient, we're usually not talking just about the blocks of things in terms of the level of this is where the guns are, this is their field of fire, they've been given their best field of fire, that's their best positioning. But also, well, hang on, that might be their best positioning, but are they sitting on top of the engines? How much heat is going to get in the magazines? How's that going to affect their powder? How's that going to affect their shell shaping? And believe it or not, shell shaping can be a factor. If you are trying to design shells around millimeter tolerances, and the shells expand a bit because they get too hot, you can find yourself in trouble. Now, this, of course, is an issue which is understandable, but people don't tend to think about it that much, but designers have to. Because when you're dealing with tolerances that fine, in order to fit the rifling properly and get the proper spin on the shell when it leaves the barrel, and so it gets the proper accuracy out to the long range, you have to think about not just expansions on terms of millimeters, but expansions in terms of hundreds of millimeters. And yes, there is an expansion which the shell does anyway, because of the force of the explosion, etc., that's firing it and all these things. But you need to be careful about those calculations, or you can end up with a shell blocking a barrel, and then, or maybe not reacting properly in the barrel. You can have blowback, you can have the breech explode, all sorts of issues can happen. So you try to avoid it. Yes, it's a very minute risk. Someone's probably going to get a reformer and go, oh, that's never happened, or there's only once that's happened. And mentally, I'm thinking from the top of my head about twice I can remember. An incident in a British warship, and an incident in a Italian one, I think. Prior to World War One. But the thing is, doesn't matter if the risk is very, very small. when you're dealing with this amount of firepower and this amount of cost, that's a very small risk that if you can, for just a little bit of organization, table planning, you can avoid, you're going to. And that's what I do. And that's where the design comes in and why it's considered efficient and a good design. Ooh, what have we got coming up? Well, next week we have Norfolk class of the Canyon class cruisers. Woohoo! It's March. I like March. And we have tomorrow Patron 47, putting USA's second fleet to work. US Coast Guard's presence missions and forward deployments. Going to be fun. That's been an interesting one to put together. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed the live, and thank you very much for everything you all do. Thank you. Dared you? Did you really think I was going to leave it that poor Lone Star got wiped out both times by the Audacious and I didn't do anything to restore her honor? Can you really see me doing that? Really? Well, that's working. And it's ready. We've got a single Japanese heavy cruiser, and we've got a single battle cruiser. I was originally going to do two, but you know what? The thing is about these Japanese heavy cruisers, and I have to admit this myself as I built them, is they do have broadside of roughly 30 odd torpedoes. No, 25 torpedoes each side, which is enough torpedoes to make most people worried, sensibly. So, Lone Star, let's go find your prey. And I would just like to point out this ship looks gorgeous. It is gorgeous. And very, very capable. Yes, I have got torpedoes on the back, but, well, you know, if you're fighting the Japanese, I thought you might as well have some deck torpedoes on the back. I know in real life probably not, but considering all the main guns are forward, I thought maybe stick some on the back. That's not too bad. And definitely plenty of 5-inch guns. So many 5-inch guns. I wonder if I could have fitted more on that. Anyway, let's see. We have a lovely battle cruiser, our Lone Star, dealing with some very interesting Japanese vessels. Now, let's see, what's this vessel doing? It's built for speed. Remember, it's a Japanese cruiser. It's a Japanese cruiser as it is imagined by me with some slight modifications. No, it's not a Tony class. I am not that cruel. And also, besides which, there you go. If you are wondering, yes, she is packing 18 8-inch guns because, well, I just wanted to see how many I could fit on her. But as you can see already, she's having to turn broadside on to bring all those guns to bear. Whereas Lone Star is certainly not broadside on. She's nicely angled. Not quite as angled as I'd probably like her to be, but definitely angled. And that makes the firing angle, again, more difficult on the cruiser. It does, because you're not proceeding in parallels. Your opponent's ship is proceeding at an angle to you, which adds a further layer of difficulty of calculation, a further layer of things you need to factor into. And because I'm in charge this time, and I plan on staying in charge, I am also going to be making sure that we stick out of torpedo range, because as anyone who's watched my videos with the joyous thing that is HMS Tiger will know that torpedoes and me are not good friends. You don't need to get close to her. You can bombard her from extreme range, and she isn't going to be able to do anything. Look at you maneuvering with the ease of a kayak. Oh, you are gorgeous, Lone Star. You really are. And the guns swing around, because again, this is the advantage of this. They're ricochets. Let's go have a look at the opponent. Bam-ba-da-ding. Over here. I'm just following the firing of shells. This is the advantage. That was the secondary shells firing away, and yes, in the nicest way, this ship does have a lot of torpedoes, but when you have a pair of them, and you're up against a pair of them, they tend to try and split up and engage from multiple sides to get you captured in a full spread of torpedoes. But yeah, this is what the 16-inch guns do to a Japanese, very powerful 16,000-ton cruiser. She's got plenty of guns all around, but yeah. Even she's now trying to turn bow on to her opponent to present as narrow as possible. Oh, goodbye, Makona. You're going down, and I'm going to quickly go see. Oh, I can't go see Lone Star before it's over. But, and there you go. Lone Star's honor has been restored. That's the important thing. So you've got to see Lone Star doing what Lone Star does good, which is destroy enemy. Yes, HMS Audacious was probably... See, the thing is, Audacious is probably the best of my front-orientated battle cruisers. She's certainly the one with the 18-inch guns, and does them very well. Lone Star, she's good too. She is a very good design. And I'm going to add this other thing. This is the sort of thing you can practice out with UAD and to an extent with Spring Shot. I would have to say I tend to use UAD more because that works better with the setup I've got here and etc. running everything off a laptop. But I want you to think about this when you're using these ships in future, in World of Warships, etc. Or whatever game you're playing, or whatever scenario you're imagining them. The efficiency of these ships, of a forward-firing arrangement, is dependent upon the quality of the commander using them. A good commander will always ensure that the maximum number of guns they have can bear on their target, whilst the minimum number of the enemies can bear on them. Now, sometimes you do that by actually just making the calculations more difficult. And that's what a forward-firing arrangement really allows you to do. We talk about this, Mark. We talk about the Battle of Romney. We talk about what Nelson and Romney get up to in World War II, the various battles they're involved in versus the Italians and others. We usually focus on the power of their 16-inch guns. And sometimes we focus on the issues of having them being quite so slow. But we don't often focus enough on the fact that they can orientate themselves in such a way that they can keep going at 23 knots. This is their big advantage. They damage you, and if you're having to broadside onto them, they're more likely to damage your engines. They are more likely to damage your engines. Your engines are now center of mass of a big target. They're aiming for your engines. They're more likely to damage your engines than you are them because of the orientation you are going to have to be to bring maximum guns to bear on them, whereas their orientation to bring maximum guns to bear on you. In which case, you might start off as the faster ship, but if you get damaged, that speed is going to drop, whereas it's more difficult to damage them. So they are probably going to keep going at 23 knots. And it comes down to the tortoise and the hare. And rather, that is a very apt thing, because the hare's entire advantage is it's got the speed. And theoretically the agility because of the speed. But the tortoise, that has its whole house, whole shell, protection. It can go, it can just keep going. And that's the thing. It does just keep going. It's very hard to take out a tortoise. Nelson and Rodney, after consent, tortoise. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and I hope you've enjoyed the examination of the orientation of ships and how we design them. Because that's what this is all about. A forward gun discussion is about ship design. It comes down in the end always to how are we getting the best value for money, the best bang for our buck. Whether that buck is a buck in tonnage or a buck in pounds, that is what we're thinking about when we're designing a ship. And again, it changes from nation to nation on how many you're ordering. One of the things I've talked about when talking about the twin ships is that the sisters, if Nelson and Rodney had not just been a pair, if they'd been a class of 4 or 5 ships, they would have been very different. There's going to be a video out about them, about how they would have been different. I think that's coming on Friday. And the thing is, you would have built them very differently if you'd been building a class of 6 than if you'd been building a class of 2. Because 2, well, 1 is a white elephant. It's a capability you have occasionally when it's available. 2 is usually have a capability, but anything happens to one of them, you're down to white elephant status. 3, you always have a capability available. 4, you always have the capability at sea, and probably a second one available. 5, you guaranteed to have a capability at sea, and you usually have 1, if not 2, available to surge with it. 6, well, 2 at sea, 2 probably available, and 2. And again, the large numbers of ships, the large number of crews involved, the large number of personnel, there is efficiencies of scale start to factor into it. And that factors in again into your design choices. Because if I'm building 2 ships, and I have to make them as survivable as possible, because if I lose one, then I'm stuck. Whereas if I'm building 6 ships, I can afford to make them more capable perhaps in another area, i.e. faster, because I can make them slightly less heavily armoured, because losing one is an upset and not something I want to do, so I want to mitigate it against the best I can. But it's not as big a loss. Losing one of 6 is a problem. Losing one of 2 is devastation. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and that's it. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone who has been subscribing to my channel. Thank you everyone who's been sharing the channel on social media. Thank you to everyone who's become patrons and are giving me these great patron topics and suggestions. Thank you to everyone who has joined the channel. Thank you to everyone who just watches and just enjoys. Thank you. Every advert you click through really helps. And thank you to everyone who's been kind of donating. I'm not sure if I said that at the beginning, but I really do mean it. It's donating to the Hider Trip is really, really kind of you. Thank you. Take care. No, there's not another one coming, but hey ho. Take care. Hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, almost great that you thought there might be another quick UAD video coming, didn't you? Thank you. Take care.